In February 2019, ICE arrested a rapper and issued one statement to the press. One line went everywhere. His whole public persona is false. The rapper was 21 Savage. Turns out he was born in London. That's level 3. There are 4 others. And some of them are so subtle, the artists themselves don't even know they're in one. These are the 5 levels of music industry plans. Let's get into it. These are the artists who built their entire brand on being discovered. The bedroom recording. The viral moment that came out of nowhere. The DIY aesthetic. The story of grinding in obscurity until the internet found them. The problem is, the internet didn't find them. The internet was pointed at them. Clairo is the textbook example. Her breakout song Pretty Girl felt like the most intimate, accidental thing in the world. A teenager in her bedroom, a webcam, 0 production budget, millions of views, attaining indie darling status overnight. What the story leaves out is the chain. Her father is Jeff Cottrell, a senior marketing executive who has worked as chief marketing officer at Converse and held senior roles at Coca-Cola and Starbucks, with deep ties to brand and music marketing. By the time Pretty Girl went viral, she was already in conversations with industry people and had professional management involved shortly after. The bedroom was real. The idea that nobody with any connections was involved is not. Now, does that mean the song isn't good? No. Does it mean she can't sing? Of course not. But here's what it means. Someone knew which doors to knock on. Someone knew how to get that video in front of the right people at the right moment. And the story that got told was that nobody did any of that. That the internet just found her. The level 1 play is the smartest play on this entire list, because you get to keep the indie credibility while running the machine behind the curtain. And if nobody can prove the strings exist, nobody can pull on them. That's the whole game at level 1. Not manufacturing an artist, manufacturing the story of how they got here. Now for level 2. These artists don't exist on Monday, and by Friday, they're on every editorial playlist. The rollout is so aggressive that even casual listeners notice something feels engineered. Festival headlines before they have a fan base. Late night TV slots before they have an album. A-list features on their 3rd single. They'll have 50 million streams, but you've never heard anyone play their music at a party. They're trending, but nobody's actually talking about them. The metrics say massive. The cultural proof isn't there yet. Olivia Rodrigo is the most documented recent example. She wasn't hiding the machine because the machine wasn't hidden. She was Disney. She had Interscope and Geffen Records behind her before Driver's License dropped. Her team and label aggressively worked TikTok and streaming platforms to amplify the song, and the strategy worked. Driver's License debuted at number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 and stayed there for 8 consecutive weeks, breaking multiple streaming records. By the end of 2021, she was the best-selling singles artist worldwide, not just in pop, but worldwide. The machine and the talent hit at exactly the same moment, and the result was one of the fastest rises in modern music history. But here's what's interesting about Rodrigo and why she's useful for understanding this level. The song was real, the feelings were real, the talent was real, and when all 3 of those things are true, the machine works. The audience follows the artist, not the campaign. Most level 2 pushes fail the moment the budget runs out because there was nothing underneath it. The label bet on the wrong horse. When it works, people forget the push ever happened. They remember the song. That's the gamble. And Rodrigo is what it looks like when the gamble pays off. This is where it gets interesting, because level 3 isn't just about having connections or getting a push. Level 3 is about constructing an identity that doesn't exist, not just a persona, an entirely false biography. 21 Savage built one of the most credible street rap identities in the genre. Everything about him said East Atlanta. His lyrics were about Zone 6, about the streets of Decatur, about growing up in the hardest parts of the city. Every profile called him a local Atlanta rapper. Double XL quoted him saying he was from Decatur, Georgia. Nobody pressed on the birthplace because nobody had reason to. In February 2019, ICE arrested him, and their spokesperson told CNN something that stopped the internet cold. His whole public persona is false. He actually came to the US from the UK as a teen and overstayed his visa. His birth certificate showed he was born in Newham, London. His lawyers confirmed he moved to Atlanta around age 7, grew up there, went to school there, and got into real trouble there. His Atlanta story wasn't invented from nothing, but the carefully constructed Atlanta-born narrative had been sitting uncorrected in every interview and profile for years. Nobody asked. Nobody checked. The image was too useful to interrogate. When it came out, the internet turned it into memes for about 48 hours, then moved on. 21 Savage absorbed it with more grace than almost anyone expected. He's now a lawful permanent resident and eventually performed in London for the first time to a crowd that went absolutely insane. But the ICE spokesperson said the quiet part out loud, and the machine that built that persona built it because it was what sold. Rick Ross is a different version of the same level. He built an entire career on the identity of a major drug trafficker, specifically borrowing the name and mythology of real-life kingpin Freeway Ricky Ross. In 2008, documents surfaced showing that before his rap career, he had spent 2 years as a corrections officer in Florida. A man rapping about moving weight on the streets had literally been working on the other side of the cell door. He denied it at first, then acknowledged it. The persona survived anyway, because by then the music had taken on a life of its own. Every time someone posts a breakdown of the Rick Ross corrections officer story, the comments section lands in the same place. People aren't angry that he wasn't a drug dealer. They're angry that the image was so convincing they never thought to ask. That's the level 3 reaction. Not outrage at the lie, outrage at how well it worked. The level 3 lesson is this: the character can outlast the exposure, but only if the music was real enough to carry it. On to level 4. These are the artists who started as one thing and became something completely different because the label needed them to be. Katie Hudson was a Christian rock artist. She released a gospel album in 2001 on Red Hill Records, performed at churches, had a real audience with real faith behind it. Then Capitol Records signed her, renamed her Katy Perry, and released I Kissed a Girl in 2008. Everything changed. Sound, image, message, name. 5 consecutive number ones from the same album. Commercially, the makeover worked on a scale nobody predicted. But Katy Perry is actually the easy version of this level. She survived it. The harder version is Lady Gaga. Stephanie Germanotta was playing piano in New York clubs in the mid-2000s. Jazz standards, normal clothes. A real musician with serious classical training doing something she genuinely loved. She got signed to Island Def Jam at 19, then dropped after a few months. Years later, L.A. Reid said publicly that dropping Lady Gaga was his biggest mistake. The head of one of the most powerful labels in the world looked back at the moment he passed on Stephanie Germanotta and said that out loud. That tells you everything about the gap between what the industry sees and what it actually has in front of it. So Stephanie studied the machine. She analyzed what worked. She looked at how successful pop careers were built and deliberately constructed something new. By 2007, she was go-go dancing, setting her hair on fire, and performing under the name Lady Gaga. She met producer Red One, got connected to Akon, and went straight to synth pop. The transformation was total. She has never claimed it wasn't a character. She said directly in interviews that she was playing a role and understood exactly what she was building. But the Joanne era raised some questions. When she tried to strip it back, to perform something closer to Stephanie than Gaga, to find herself again in the music, the commercial response was noticeably quieter than her peak years. Joanne debuted at number 1, but produced 0 top 10 singles. The same woman who had 5 consecutive number 1s from one album couldn't land a single in the top 10 when she tried to strip the character back. She has talked in multiple interviews about the cost of performing someone else's idea of you for long enough, the identity questions that creates, the A Star is Born moment that eventually gave her a way back to something that felt real again. The level 4 artist usually had something genuine before the makeover. The label saw that and invested in it. But what the label wanted wasn't the genuine thing. They wanted the commercially optimized version of it. And the artist learned to deliver that. Sometimes they find their way back. Sometimes the character is all that's left. This is the darkest level, and it's the only one where calling it an industry plant almost feels like an understatement. These aren't artists who had connections or got a push or adopted a character or went through a makeover. These are people who were assembled, auditioned, selected, trained, packaged, and deployed. They didn't choose their music. They didn't choose their image. They didn't choose their persona. They showed up and performed what they were told to perform. Lou Pearlman ran the operation that gave us NSYNC and the Backstreet Boys. He held auditions and selected the members based on marketability. He handed them songs, written by professional songwriters. He choreographed every move. He controlled every public appearance. He took the majority of the profits. And then he put himself in the contracts as a 6th member of each group. So he was collecting an equal share of every dollar those groups earned on top of his manager and producer cuts. The members of NSYNC and the Backstreet Boys were making the industry rich while barely seeing any of it. Both groups eventually sued him. Pearlman was later convicted of running one of the largest Ponzi schemes in American history, defrauding investors of hundreds of millions of dollars. He died in prison in 2016. One Direction went through the same machine with a different operator. Simon Cowell's team assembled them from individual contestants who had failed separately on the X Factor in 2010, then signed them to Psycho and Sony. Songs, styling, and early promotion were almost entirely label-driven. Zayn Malik left in 2015 and said publicly that he never got to show the music he actually wanted to make. Harry Styles has talked about how long it took after the group ended to figure out what his own voice even was outside of what had been built around him. The infrastructure was enormous. The autonomy was essentially zero. What Pearlman and Cowell built became the blueprint for K-pop, which took the model and refined it in ways that make the boy band era look loosely managed. Korean entertainment companies take trainees as young as their early teens, sometimes younger, and put them through intensive programs in company dorms. Training days of 8 to 10 or more hours, covering dance, vocals, and language classes. Strict controls over dating, diet, and public behavior. Contracts that can last 7 years or more and give the company broad authority over image and output. When the company decides a group is no longer commercially viable, it disbands them and begins the process again with the next class. Britney Spears is the Western version of what happens when the product breaks down under the weight of the machine. She was in the Mickey Mouse Club alongside Christina Aguilera, Justin Timberlake, and Ryan Gosling. It was essentially a development program for future stars. She signed with Jive Records as a teenager. They controlled the music, the image, and her public positioning around her personal life. She was heavily marketed as abstinent and repeatedly asked to affirm it in interviews, while simultaneously being presented in videos and performances in ways that were explicitly provocative. She has talked about this directly. The contradiction was not an accident. It was a deliberate commercial strategy. By her mid-20s, the pressure of being one of the most controlled, most watched, and most profitable products in entertainment history had taken a visible and public toll. The conservatorship that followed her public breakdown gave legal control of her finances and personal decisions to other people for 13 years. She was deemed unfit to manage her own life. She was simultaneously deemed fit enough to complete a 4-year Las Vegas residency, multiple world tours, and several album cycles that generated tens of millions of dollars for everyone around her. The Level 5 artist isn't just manufactured, they're trapped. And the escape, when it comes at all, usually takes decades and a legal battle. The term industry plant gets thrown around like it means one thing. It doesn't. It means 5 completely different things, depending on which level you're looking at. And here's the thing the label system doesn't want you sitting with. The same accusation lands on completely different situations. Clairo having a father with marketing connections is not the same thing as Britney Spears being placed under a conservatorship while generating millions for people who controlled her legally for over a decade. Those are not the same story. Treating them like they are lets the industry off the hook for the Level 5 cases while punishing the Level 1 artists for something the entire industry does as standard practice. The accusation also lands on people who genuinely earned it the hardest way possible. Sabrina Carpenter spent roughly a decade putting out albums with only modest mainstream impact. 6 records, slow, grinding, largely invisible work. She gave a speech at the Variety Hitmakers Awards show in 2023, where she described herself as the tortoise in the Hair Story. She talked about watching contemporaries blow up. While she kept working through the years, nobody was paying attention. Then Espresso dropped in, April 2024, and turned her into a global pop star. And the internet called her an overnight success and an industry plant in the same breath. She was neither. She was someone who worked for a decade until the right song met the right moment. But the overnight narrative is cleaner, and the plant accusation is easier than accounting for the years nobody was watching. So the next time you see a new artist blow up and the comments fill with those 2 words, ask yourself which level you're actually looking at, because this video just showed you 5 of them. And the difference between Clairo having a well-connected father and Britney Spears being legally controlled for 13 years is not a difference of degree. It's a difference of kind. The industry plant label flattens all of it into one accusation. And that's exactly what Lou Pearlman was counting on, what Simon Cowell was counting on, and what every executive who has ever handed a 16-year-old a contract they didn't understand was counting on. Keep the conversation about the artists, never about the system. If you like this content and want to see more, the next video is already on screen. Click it. I'll catch you over there. Take it easy.